Picture that classic Mediterranean scene. Sparkling turquoise water, sun-drenched beaches. Idyllic, right?
Absolutely.
But lately, there's been a less welcome addition to this picture, something a bit, well, stingy.
Uh-huh.
Forget crowded resorts. We're plunging into a significant and, frankly, quite uncomfortable shift happening in this iconic sea.
Yeah, absolutely. Between 2020 and 2023, the Mediterranean saw this really striking increase in blooms of Pelagia noctiluca. That's the mauve stinger jellyfish.
The mauve stinger.
And this isn't just, a minor nuisance. It's a development with some pretty wide-ranging consequences.
Precisely. So for this deep dive, we've got a comprehensive report that really gets under the skin of this prickly issue. We're going to explore the reasons behind these jellyfish explosions, the impact they're having on, well, everything from tourism to fishing, and even the overall health of the Mediterranean ecosystem.
Yeah, the report really highlights significant impacts across those crucial sectors. We'll be looking at how these blooms are affecting the vital tourism industry.
It's huge there.
Huge. And the already stressed fishing industry and, of course, the delicate ecological balance of the Mediterranean Sea itself.
Right. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. To truly understand the complexities of these mauve stinger blooms and what they might reveal about the condition of this essential marine environment. Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is this Pelagia noctiluca?
So Pelagia noctiluca is a fascinating, though, yes, currently problematic organism. It's a relatively small jellyfish, usually easily identified by its beautiful pink to mauve color.
Pink or mauve, okay.
And as its name suggests, noctiluca, it's bioluminescent. It can actually produce its own light.
That sounds almost magical. But I'm guessing there's a bit more to it than just pretty colors and glowing.
There is, yeah. Unlike many jellyfish species that have that bottom-dwelling polyp stage in their life cycle.
Right, like a fixed stage.
Exactly. The mauve stinger is holoplanktonic. Think of it as a lifelong floater. Spends its entire existence just drifting in the water column. And this lack of a settled stage, well, it allows for much quicker reproduction and colonization when conditions are right.
So no settling down for these guys, just free-floating and ready to multiply fast. What about what they eat? Are they picky?
Not at all. Pelagia noctiluca is a pretty voracious predator. It feeds on zooplankton, fish eggs, even fish larvae.
Oh, wow. Eggs and larvae, too.
Yeah. Its tentacles are armed with these things called nematocysts. They're specialized stinging cells, which it uses very effectively to capture prey.
Ouch.
So this makes it a significant competitor in the marine food web, especially, in areas already under pressure from things like overfishing.
And it seems like they're not too fussy about where they live either, based on how widespread this seems.
That's right. They're quite adaptable. They can handle variations in both salinity and water temperature, which helps explain their ability to thrive in quite a range of conditions.
Now, jellyfish in the Mediterranean, I mean, that's not exactly breaking news, is it? I'm pretty sure most people who've holidayed there have maybe seen one or worried about seeing one.
You're correct. Yeah, jellyfish have been part of the Mediterranean ecosystem for a long, long time. There are even historical accounts from ancient Greece and Rome that mention stinging jellyfish.
Okay, so what's the big deal then? Why all the focus now?
The crucial point, and this is really key, is the marked increase we've seen, especially since the early 2000s. It's the frequency, the duration, and the sheer intensity of these blooms.
Right.
What were once, occasional annoyances have become much more regular, much more disruptive events.
And this isn't just random, is it? This increase must be connected to some broader changes happening in the environment.
Precisely. The report we're looking at, it details a number of interconnected factors that are creating what you could call a perfect storm for these jellyfish blooms.
Okay, a perfect storm. Let's dive into that storm then. What's whipping up these massive jellyfish aggregations?
Well, probably the most significant factor is climate change. Warmer sea temperatures do a few things. They extend the jellyfish reproductive season.
Longer breeding time.
Yep. They increase the survival rates of their larvae, and they even speed up their metabolic processes. So they grow faster, reproduce faster.
Warmer waters, more jellyfish.
Yeah.
That makes intuitive sense. What else is contributing to this storm?
Overfishing plays a critical role.
How so?
Well, think about it. We're removing their natural predators, things like tuna, sea turtles, and also their competitors for food, like anchovies and sardines. So it creates this kind of ecological vacuum, this perfect opportunity for jellyfish to just thrive.
So by taking out other fish, we're inadvertently rolling out the red carpet for jellyfish. That's quite the twist.
It is. And another significant culprit is something called eutrophication.
Okay.
This is essentially an overload of nutrients getting into coastal waters, often from things like agricultural runoff, sewage discharge,
Dilution, basically.
pollution. It's like over-fertilizing the ocean.
Yeah.
It leads to these massive growths of plankton, which is the jellyfish's main food source. More food, more jellyfish.
So our waste is essentially feeding the jellyfish boom. That's not a great thought.
No. And finally, even coastal modifications. Things like building harbors, breakwaters, they can also contribute.
Oh.
These structures often create calmer, sometimes slightly warmer, microhabitats. Little pockets that are favorable for jellyfish to kind of gather and aggregate in.
Feels like a really complex web then. All these different issues kind of converging to favor the jellyfish. Do these factors interact, make each other worse?
They often do. They can have a synergistic effect. For example, climate change can intensify stratification in the water column that's layering.
Right.
And that, in turn, can enhance the effects of eutrophication, trapping those nutrients near the surface, leading to even more robust and longer-lasting plankton blooms, and thus jellyfish blooms.
Okay, so things could potentially spiral if these factors continue on their current paths. Now, the report gives us this regional snapshot. What happened between 2020 and 2023 specifically? Let's look at some examples. Greece. What was going on there?
Greece really experienced particularly persistent and intense blooms. Across several regions, too, the Sporades Islands, Corfu, large parts of the Ionian and Aegean seas, even extending down to the Cyclades.
Wow, widespread.
Very. And this led to repeated beach closures, public health advisories, right through the peak summer months. A significant disruption to tourism, as you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's an organization, Biodiversity GR, they actually reported record-setting jellyfish densities in 2022, which really highlights a concerning imbalance in the local marine ecosystem.
Record densities.
Yeah, and the blooms were so dense in some areas it even caused navigational challenges for things like ferries and boats trying to get into marinas.
Wow, that's much more than just a few stings ruining a swim. It sounds like it really impacted daily life and that crucial tourism industry there. What about Italy?
In Italy, particularly along the Tyrrhenian coast and around Sicily, fishermen encountered these massive carpets of jellyfish, just huge slicks stretching for kilometers.
Carpets.
And their traditional fishing nets, they became pretty much unusable, clogged up, physically damaged by the sheer weight and volume of jellyfish.
Oh, man.
And researchers, particularly looking at the Venice Lagoon, linked these events to prolonged marine heat waves combined with reduced freshwater inflows during drought periods,
Cool.
which created these stagnant, nutrient-rich conditions, just ideal for jellyfish proliferation.
So not only were the jellyfish a nuisance, but they were actively damaging fishing gear, disrupting livelihoods. What about Malta? Did they see similar things?
Malta also recorded exceptionally high jellyfish activity during this period. Unprecedented bloom densities reported by their monitoring stations.
Unprecedented.
Yeah. And this had a severe impact on their recreational diving and boating industries, which are, really crucial for their tourism economy.
Right.
And despite efforts like using aerial surveillance to spot them, the sudden and often unpredictable nature of the blooms just made it really difficult for businesses to prepare or, mitigate the effects effectively.
It sounds like these things can really just pop up almost overnight and cause chaos. What about Spain? Or were they affected?
The Balearic Islands in Spain were heavily affected, yeah. It prompted a governmental response, including deploying these floating jellyfish nets to try and protect popular beaches.
Did those work?
They had some success, yeah, but mainly in localized areas. It's hard to protect entire coastlines.
Sure.
And over in Catalonia, aquaculture farms, fish farms, reported significant losses in their sea bass and gilthead bream stocks.
How did the jellyfish affect farmed fish?
Well, physical damage from the jellyfish getting into the pens and just the stress caused by their presence. It got bad enough that the regional government actually had to initiate emergency support programs for the affected fishers and aquaculture operations.
So even aquaculture, which you think of as a more controlled environment, isn't immune. That's significant. And France, the French Riviera, the Côte d'Azur.
The Côte d'Azur saw a really significant surge in jellyfish sting incidents. Hospitals, lifeguard services, they reported over a 70% increase in treatments for stings in the summer of 2021.
70% increase.
Yeah, compared to the average of the previous decade. So, quite a jump. Local authorities and tourism boards, they launched education campaigns, put up multilingual signs, provided medical stations on beaches.
Trying to manage it.
Trying to manage the immediate health impacts, yes. But the presence of the jellyfish still led to noticeable decreases in beach attendance and, consequently, tourism revenue.
It's really clear from these examples this isn't just a local blip here or there. It's a Mediterranean-wide problem. What are the broader ecological consequences then, beyond the immediate disruption?
Well, the ecological effects are quite concerning. Firstly, there's what we call trophic disruption.
Trophic, food web related.
Exactly. By consuming vast amounts of plankton and those larval fish we mentioned, the Pelagia noctiluca is essentially undermining the very base of the marine food web. And that has cascading effects up through the species that depend on those resources.
So fewer plankton and young fish means potential trouble for bigger fish, for seabirds, for everything further up the food chain.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Precisely. Secondly, when these massive blooms eventually die off and sink, the decomposition process consumes large amounts of oxygen from the water. This can potentially lead to hypoxic zones or dead zones, especially more enclosed coastal areas or bays.
Oxygen depletion, that's obviously really serious for most marine life. Are there other ecological impacts?
There's the potential for something scientists are calling jellyfication.
Jellyfication.
Yeah, it sounds a bit strange, but it describes a phase shift, a move towards simpler ecosystems that are dominated by gelatinous zooplankton like jellyfish rather than, say, fish. It indicates a stressed, potentially unbalanced marine environment. And these kinds of shifts, once they happen, are often very difficult to reverse.
It paints a pretty bleak picture for the Mediterranean ecosystem if this trend continues.
Yeah.
And beyond the environmental damage, these jellyfish blooms are clearly hitting Mediterranean economies hard too. Let's dig deeper into those direct economic impacts. We've touched on tourism, but what are the specifics?
Well, tourism, as you said, it's a cornerstone for many Mediterranean economies. It's taken a significant hit. We're talking loss of revenue for hotels, restaurants, tour operators during these peak bloom periods. It's been substantial.
Yeah.
And the negative media coverage, viral videos of jellyfish-infested beaches that creates a negative perception of these destinations, which can linger.
Absolutely, that ick factor.
Exactly. And then there are the direct costs associated with trying to protect beaches, installing those anti-jellyfish nets, for example, that costs money.
Sure.
And interestingly, we also saw this rise in popularity of jellyfish alert apps on smartphones, which shows tourists are actively trying to avoid the problem.
Trying to dodge the blooms.
Right, but that doesn't solve the underlying economic losses for the region if people just go elsewhere or stay away from the coast.
So it's not just about the immediate sting risk. It's about the overall perception, the potential for long-term damage to the Mediterranean's tourism brand. What about the fishing industry? We heard about damaged nets.
Yeah, the fishing industry faces a multitude of problems from this. The jellyfish clog and physically damaged fishing gear trawl nets, long lines reducing their efficiency, costing money to repair or replace.
Right.
Catches can be spoiled by jellyfish slime and stings, making them less valuable or even completely unsellable at market. And perhaps the most concerning thing long-term is that predation by jellyfish on fish eggs and larvae. It directly threatens the future regeneration of fish stocks that the industry relies on.
So it hits their current catch and their future catch.
Exactly. Many small-scale fishers, in particular, have reported increased costs, increased strain, having to spend more time at sea for smaller, lower-quality catches.
It sounds like a real double whammy for fisheries' immediate damage and a threat to their future. Beyond tourism and fishing, are there other economic consequences we should know about?
Yes. Public health and safety are significant concerns. That increase in jellyfish stings, it leads to more medical incidents. That places a burden on local healthcare systems, especially in those tourist-heavy areas during peak season.
Right, straining resources.
Definitely. And the public anxiety, the fear of stings, that can also deter people from visiting beaches, even sometimes when jellyfish aren't actually present in large numbers. The perception matters.
Yeah.
The report even mentions increased insurance costs for businesses in affected areas, potentially due to claims related to bloom events impacting operations or safety.
Insurance costs, too.
And it's really important to remember that economically fragile coastal communities, the ones that heavily rely on that seasonal income from tourism and fishing, they are particularly vulnerable to these impacts.
That makes sense. They have less buffer. Does the report quantify any of this?
It did mention some figures. For example, estimated tourism losses in Greece alone surpassing 300 million between 2020 and 2022.
300 million euros.
Wow. Yeah, and similar worrying trends were noted in Spain and Italy, although specific overall figures weren't always easy to consolidate across all sectors. But the scale is
Those
significant.
are staggering figures. Okay, so what's being done? This is clearly a massive problem. Are there potential solutions being explored?
There is work being done, yes. It's more of a multi-pronged approach being explored rather than a single magic bullet.
Okay.
Scientific monitoring networks, like one called MedJL, are being enhanced. Better data collection, better forecasting capabilities are key.
Trying to predict them better.
Exactly. Then there are experimental engineering solutions being tested. Things like improved jellyfish exclusion nets for beaches or fish farms, underwater suction devices, even using drones for detection and maybe potentially removal in small areas.
Interesting. Suction devices and drones.
Yeah, still experimental, mostly. On the policy side, initiatives are starting to integrate jellyfish bloom scenarios into national coastal management plans, so planning for them,
Being proactive.
hopefully. And importantly, citizen science initiatives are playing a role too, engaging the public in data collection by reporting sightings through apps or websites.
Getting more eyes on the water.
Precisely. More data helps.
It sounds like a lot of different angles are being considered, but you mentioned no silver bullet. The report suggests these are all partial solutions at best?
That's correct. Given the complexity of the issue, the scale of the Mediterranean, and the multiple drivers, a combination of strategies is almost certainly going to be needed. No single fix.
And looking ahead, what do the future projections suggest? Based on the trends causing this, are these blooms likely to become sort of the new normal? Or even get worse?
Unfortunately, based on current climate projections and the ongoing pressures on ocean health, like overfishing and pollution, the projections do indicate that Pelagia noctiluca blooms are likely to increase, both in frequency and severity.
That's a really sobering thought. So given that, what are the key recommendations coming out of the report for tackling this growing problem?
Well, the report strongly emphasizes the need for holistic marine management. That means integrating jellyfish monitoring with broader frameworks that manage fisheries, control pollution, and conserve biodiversity, seeing it all as connected.
Makes sense. Not just tackling jellyfish in isolation.
Exactly. Addressing the root causes, especially through climate action, is absolutely crucial, though obviously a huge challenge.
The big one.
The big one. Increasing public education and awareness is also vital about marine resilience, responsible coastal behavior, what individuals and communities can do.
Right?
Then there's incentivizing innovation, encouraging new technologies for better bloom prediction, perhaps more effective mitigation tools.
Supporting those experimental ideas.
Yes. And finally, because the Mediterranean is a shared sea, fostering regional cooperation is essential. Using bodies like the Barcelona Convention to get a unified, effective response across national borders.
So it's a complex challenge, definitely no easy answers, requires action on, well, multiple fronts from global climate policy right down to local beach management and regional cooperation.
Precisely. The blooms of Pelagia noctiluca that we saw particularly between 2020 and 2023, they really serve as a stark reminder, a clear signal of the significant environmental changes happening in the Mediterranean
Yeah.
and the profound consequences they can have, ecologically and economically.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is, isn't it? Our climate, our fishing practices, even how we build along the coast, and how these seemingly separate actions can have these major unintended impacts on marine ecosystems like this.
Absolutely. This isn't just about, annoying jellyfish ruining a holiday swim.
Yeah.
It's a symptom of broader environmental distress and maybe a catalyst for us to really rethink our relationship with the sea.
So as you're reflecting on this deep dive, maybe consider this. How does this specific example, the rise of the mauve stinger jellyfish in the Mediterranean, connect to those larger global challenges of environmental change we hear so much about? Think about that interconnectedness of ecosystems and human activities. What does this seemingly localized problem really tell us about the overall health of our oceans and maybe our own role in shaping that health? It's definitely something to think about.